I first started smoking, or should I say, I had my first smoke the first year of secondary school. And it's the same person that I mentioned in previous videos that pretty much walked me and peer pressured me into doing this. But it was just one smoke, and it wasn't until a few years later that I actually picked up the habit of smoking, just part of being a peer group and that thing being introduced to the peer group along with drugs and alcohol as well. And because of not having any money for a few years after school, I never really became a heavy smoker. Now, we all know how terrible smoking is, or we should know by now. There has been a huge movement to make people aware of this over the years, and I shouldn't have to convince you that it is a terrible thing to take up, a terrible habit to have. And that was pretty much the attitude in general of the time when I started smoking. Now, you might hear people push back on occasion and say, but smoking helps me relax, and this is something that's actually been proven that the relaxation you get from smoking is satisfying the nicotine addiction that it is creating. So it is creating the stress in which you then become relaxed from. Now, in a way, I look at smoking like I do self harm. It's a form of self mutilation. You are damaging yourself by smoking, and it's an invisible form of damage as well. So you don't really get to see it immediately. And of course, we all know that it leads to lung cancer and other diseases and poor health in general. But there is one thing that you can actually visibly see in smokers, and it's smokers who have been smoking for at least a decade, in and around your 30s and 40s. You may start to notice, as you see a lot of faces as time goes by, that smokers tend to age quicker. One thing I've noticed is that the bags under the eyes and a lot of wrinkly skin and just that aging process seems to be more prominent in people who smoke, but smoking tends to go kind of hand in hand with poor diet and an inactive or a sedentary lifestyle, just because of the nature of picking up a habit like that. But anyway, I'm not trying to convince you not to smoke with this video. There is enough information out there in the world that's already telling you how bad smoking is. I just wanted to tell you how I stopped, and then hope that maybe if you're a smoker watching this, it might be a strategy you could use. So, as I've already said, I didn't really smoke a lot when I began because I couldn't really afford it. And then when I did get a job, I didn't become a heavy smoker. Smoking was sort of always there and something that I did every day, but it wasn't persistent throughout the day. I was quite lucky that I never picked it up in that way. One thing I think really helped is I always hated smoking first thing in the morning. I always felt like I needed a fair few hours to get into the day before I actually had a cigarette. And then over time, with the knowledge that it was bad for me, I started to get a nagging sense that I needed to stop. And then what eventually this turned into was a process in my mind of how long can I actually go without smoking, because I tried the whole cold turkey thing and didn't last more than a day or two. So then I started to count how many cigarettes I'd have in a day. Maybe it was like 4 or 5, and eventually I'd get it down to 1 to 3 a day. And this was a process that did take months and years, but slowly I just had less and less. And then I would start to go days with them. And this was probably because I was just smoking on the weekends when partying. And then as I tried to avoid alcohol, which is something I'm going to talk about in a minute, I started to go to parties less, and then I just ended up going months without smoking. In fact, I remember that there were 2 back-to-back periods where I went 3 months without a single cigarette. And around that time, it started to seem a bit ridiculous just to smoke every couple of months. What I had stuck in my mind was the idea that I always wanted to be able to smoke if I wanted to, and that I didn't really want to fully say I'm never going to smoke again, which is something I know absolutely 100% true today. But eventually that power faded. So then after, 6 months or so, I kind of realized I think I'm here. I think I'm never going to smoke again. It would just seem so silly to pick up a cigarette again, and I actually didn't have anything that physical inside of me, the nicotine, pushing me anymore. So that's kind of how I got off, and that was a very gradual way of doing things. I kept it in my mind, that burden of this is bad for you, need to cut down. That helped me just reduce the amount day by day, and then started to go days without. And so I'm a gradual person when it comes to change for many, many things. Maybe not everything, but the gradual process of quitting is what worked for me. So if you've tried cold turkey and it hasn't worked, maybe just try this gradual approach. Think about when you have your first cigarette in the day. Try and push it back a couple of hours. When you get used to that, push it back a couple of more and slowly wind down on the amount you're smoking, and then see if you can start to skip days, and hopefully that strategy might work for you. So now, alcohol. Alcohol had always been a part of my self-abuse and escapist diet, if we were to call it that. But I was never actually that big on alcohol. I couldn't stand the taste of it, and I couldn't really drink it either. Beers were almost impossible. One or two, and my body would just physically not let me drink anymore, which led me to drinking spirits, the harder stuff, because I could actually consume that. But beers never ever worked for me. Anyway, if there was ever a day where I didn't have drugs, I didn't have access to them, then I'd immediately be falling back onto alcohol, heading down to the pub or seeing friends and drinking with them. And this led to some pretty shameful drinking, as you know, I didn't even enjoy the beverage. I was just using it to get out of my own head. So when I finally got to that place where I gave up the drugs, I quickly found myself drinking a heck of a lot more. Essentially, I had replaced one bad habit with another one. I'd put down the smoke, I'd picked up the booze, and I was getting pretty deep into it, drinking constantly, and I started to think that I might be an alcoholic. Now, at this point in time, my mind was really starting to fall apart. I was in a bad place, things weren't going well, and it caused me to introspect on my own behavior a lot, and I started to look up alcoholism and learn about it. And this is when I heard it described as habitual and ritualistic drinking. And those two words very firmly stuck in my mind, and I just remember them so vividly to this day because they described exactly what I was doing. However, it also described the culture of a large part of the country I live in here, that people habitually and ritualistically go out on the weekend with friends in social groups to drink. Now, I'm not suggesting everyone is an alcoholic. It's just something that I observed and then became very aware of. And if you've heard me ramble about it in one of my live streams, you'll know that I have quite an unfavorable look on that type of culture now, and this is where that started. I saw it in myself, and then I saw it in the world around me. And so if anything ever interrupted my drinking routine, it would become a real big problem. I wouldn't feel right, and I just knew this was completely wrong. It was the same problem I dealt with the other drugs, and so this didn't last for very long for me. I was very fortunate to find my way to that place. However, I didn't just cut it off cold turkey like I did with smoking. I had a very similar approach of just cutting it down, less and less days, less and less booze, cut out the spirits, and before long I was hardly drinking at all. Now, these two things happened around the same time. So when I was getting off the booze, I was also cutting down the smoking, so they kind of happened within the same time frame. And I remember a particular social event where I had all the temptations to smoke and to drink, but I just found myself with a complete resolve not to do either of those things, and then it became a source of strength that I was past these. And after that event is actually, I think, when I kind of knew I would never drink or smoke again. So looking back on it, I might have not been an alcoholic in some definitions, but what I've learned is that I am definitely, without a doubt, an addict, and that I need to mold my my addictive tendencies onto productive things. I really like to get stuck into stuff, and instead of that being drink and drugs, it is now, well, it was making music for a time, and then it went into making videos, obviously, and then if you've been following the second channel, you would have seen I put that energy into doing guitar for a couple of years, and that's just how I do things now. At the moment, I'm on a real health and fitness kick, but essentially it's that wanting to come back to the same feeling over and over again, except now I've channeled it into positive and healthy things in my life. Now, in the other videos, I tried to bring a little bit of advice to the table, and I feel like I had something stronger to say because of how deeply those other things hurt me, whereas with the alcoholism, I got it on the light side. I think I never really experienced too many consequences because my experience with it was relatively brief. And the same thing for smoking as well. I kind of feel like I got away scot-free. I didn't smoke particularly too heavy, and now I'm pretty sure my lungs are in good, healthy condition. I do a lot of running and cardio, and so I've been quite fortunate. What I will say, however, is if listening to my story here has caused you to introspect on some of your own behavior yourself, that is a good thing. Follow that feeling, even if it is uncomforting to know that perhaps some of the things you are partaking in aren't right for you. If you can get to doing the things that are right for you, it's a hard path to walk, but it's rewarding once you're there. So introspect and think about your own behavior. If you drink, if you smoke, maybe make a change. It'll be better for your health. You'll live longer if you choose to, get rid of these terrible habits. If you go online and do some research, there's a plethora of information on how bad alcohol is and how bad smoking is, and if these things are in your life, you could definitely do with less of them. Anyway, that's the note I'm going to leave it on. So thanks for listening again, and I'll see you soon with another one. Bye bye.